He bought an old cabin for 50 cents, then found a shackled bride hidden beneath the hay. The coin was dull, scarred with years of passing through hands that never cared for its shine. 50 cents, that's all it took for Caleb Ward to buy himself. A roof, though calling it a roof, was being generous. The old rancher who sold it to him laughed through broken teeth, whiskey wet on his beard. "Ain't worth more than kindling," he'd said, slapping the deed across the warped counter of the saloon. Caleb hadn't argued. He'd taken the deed, taken the coin back into his pocket as though its weight still mattered, and ridden out where the land turned to silence. The cabin stood alone at the edge of a barren stretch, its timbers gray and bowed, roof sagging under years of neglect. No smoke from the chimney, no sign of life, but a hawk circling overhead, its cry like a warning. The place looked less like shelter and more like a tomb forgotten by the world. Still, Caleb dismounted, boots sinking in dust, shoulders heavy with the weariness of a man who'd run too long and found nowhere to stop. Inside, the air stank of mildew and hay, of damp rot and mouse droppings. The floor groaned under his weight. A beam of late sun cut through a gap in the roof, catching the dust in the air, turning it into a river of gold motes that shifted with every breath. Caleb dropped his saddlebag, rolled his shoulders, and looked around. A stall leaned half-collapsed. Against the back wall, hay piled high like some forgotten grave mound. He knelt, pulling at the straw with rough hands, meaning only to clear the space. That's when he heard it. Soft, stifled, almost lost in the groan of the wood. A gasp. Not the sound of wind. Not animal. Human. Caleb froze. His breath slowed. The hawk's cry echoed faintly outside, and then silence. He reached again, fingers brushing deeper into the hay. The sound came once more, this time a whimper. With a curse under his breath, Caleb shoved aside the straw. His hands met skin. Cold, damp, trembling. The hay parted, and he saw her, a girl, young, though dirt and bruises masked her years, curled on her side, wrists raw from rope burns, one ankle bound in iron. The shackle bit into her skin, chain fixed to the beam beneath. The stall. Her hair clung in tangles to her face, and her eyes were wild, wide like a doe caught under a hunter's lamp. She flinched at his shadow, at his presence, at the world itself. Caleb's heart lurched, not with desire, but with the kind of sick recognition only a man who'd seen too many. Cages could feel. Her lips moved, cracked and trembling. Only one word left them. Please. The sound wasn't louder than a breath, but it cut through him like steel. Caleb swallowed hard, his throat dry as desert bone. He lifted his hand slowly, palm open, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Easy," he muttered, voice low, rasping. She pressed back against the beam, chains rattling like dry snake bones. Panic widened her gaze. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand answers. Not yet. Instead, he rose, went to his saddlebag, and pulled free a tin cup. He filled it with what water he had left from his canteen and crouched before her once more. Her eyes flickered between the cup and his scarred hands. Her lips trembled as though the choice to drink might kill her. Finally, she leaned forward, chains grinding, and took the rim between cracked lips. The water spilled as much as it filled her. She drank like a woman half dead. Caleb watched, jaw tight. He didn't touch her, didn't force more than she took. When the cup was empty, he set it aside and leaned back against the stool beam, staring at the rotting wood above them. Outside, thunder rolled low across the horizon. The storm was moving in, wind moaning through the gaps of the cabin, dust swirling against the shutters. The air smelled of rain, sharp and heavy. Inside, the girl curled into herself again, eyes half-lidded, but never leaving him. The shackle clinked every time she shifted, a sound that pressed against Caleb's ears like a brand. He rubbed his jaw, silent. He had walked into the cabin thinking he'd bought a roof for his head. Instead, he'd stepped into something foul, something buried beneath silence and straw. The thunder cracked closer, a hard whip of sound across the sky. The girl shivered. Caleb turned to her, watching the tremor of her frame. the way every clap of the storm seemed to carry memory too heavy for her body to bear. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, didn't need to. Not yet. All he knew was that no woman belonged in chains. As the storm gathered, he felt the weight of it, outside and within. A truth he couldn't shake. 50 cents had bought him more than a shack. It had bought him into someone else's sin, and storms, he knew, had a way of tearing roofs clear off rotten homes. The candle guttered, thunder boomed, and in that trembling, silence between, Caleb felt the world shift. The storm came hard and sudden, as storms often do on the open plains. Wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls, rattling loose boards like bones in a coffin. Rain slapped the roof in a rhythm that felt like fists, angry and relentless. Caleb struck a match, the flame trembling in the draught, and lit a stub of candle he'd found wedged in the corner. The weak glow cast the room in flickering gold. Shadows, jerking across the warped wood like restless spirits. The girl sat curled against the stall beam, knees drawn to her chest. The chain at her ankle gleamed whenever the candle caught it, a cruel reminder that the storm outside wasn't the only thing holding her captive. Her face, hollow, gaunt, streaked with dirt, looked even smaller in the shifting light. Caleb sat opposite her, back against the wall, his revolver resting on his thigh out of habit. He didn't speak, neither did she. Only the storm spoke, and the storm was merciless. It was her voice that broke the silence, brittle but steady, like reeds bending in the wind but refusing to snap. My name is Evelyn. Her eyes, though dulled by hunger and fear, met his. Caleb gave the smallest nod, a recognition, though his jaw remained tight. They took me, she said, voice low, swallowed off. Her words hung heavy in the small room. Caleb let them settle. He didn't rush her, didn't prod, just listened, the way a man does when he knows truth doesn't need coaxing. It bleeds out on its own. His gaze drifted to the shackle. The iron dug cruelly into her skin, flesh raw and bruised beneath it. He shifted forward, crouching, eyes studying the clasp. His fingers brushed the cold metal, and Evelyn flinched. He muttered under his breath, low and hard, "No woman belongs in chains." The words carried weight, heavier than the storm's pounding. They weren't meant for her as much as they were for himself. Evelyn's lips pressed tight, eyes wet but defiant. Lightning split the sky, flooding the cabin with sudden white. Evelyn cried out, clutching her leg as though the light itself burned. Caleb froze, watching her body fold inward, shoulders shaking. When the thunder cracked right after, she buried her face against her knees. Caleb's chest tightened. He knew fear that deep. It was the kind that lived long after the danger was gone. He eased back onto his heels, memories clawing up like weeds through soil, whiskey-soaked nights, the screams of his family the night border raiders swept through. Rifles spitting fire, his hands red with blood that wasn't his. He had left them, ridden away, chasing ghosts instead of facing what he'd lost. That shame clung to him like smoke. Now here was this girl, fragile but unbroken, shackled like a beast. And for the first time in years, Caleb felt a stirring in his chest that wasn't bitterness, wasn't rage. It was something closer to resolve. Storm raged louder. Coyotes wailed in the distance, their cries carrying like the voices of the dead, haunting the dark. Evelyn lifted her head, listening as though each sound marked her doom. Caleb reached into his bag and pulled out a hunk of stale bread, breaking it in half. He set one piece down beside her, the other he bit into himself. She hesitated, staring at it as though it might be a trick. But hunger won. Slowly, cautiously, she took it, chewing with small, careful bites. Two strangers, sharing bread, sharing fear. The candle guttered, casting the room into deeper shadow. Caleb leaned back against the wall, chewing slowly, watching her through the flicker. Evelyn's face softened slightly, but the fear never left her eyes. For a while, only the storm spoke. Then Evelyn's voice returned, quieter now, carrying a weight that chilled him deeper than the wind. "They'll come back for me," she whispered, Her eyes locked to his, steady, certain, and they'll kill you too. The words sank like stones in water. Caleb didn't answer. He only sat, silent as the grave, the storm raging outside, the storm inside him just beginning to stir. Dawn bled across the horizon, red as a wound. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the land washed raw and silent. Rain pooled in the ruts outside the cabin, black water shining like oil, and the earth reeked of mud and horse droppings. Caleb stood at the stall beam, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hammer in hand. The iron shackle bit cruel into Evelyn's ankle, and each strike sent sparks across the wood, his knuckles splitting from the effort. Sweat stung his eyes. His hands were raw, but still he swung. Evelyn flinched at every blow, clutching her arms tight around her knees. Finally, she lifted her gaze, voice frayed. "Stop," she whispered. "They'll come back. Let me go before they find you." Caleb didn't look up. He brought the hammer down again, the ring of steel sharp against the morning hush. "You don't even know me," she said, louder this time, desperation cutting through the quiet. Caleb paused, chest heaving. His eyes found hers, shadowed, but steady. "I know chains," he said. "That's enough." The words settled heavy between them, heavier than the hammer in his hand. Then, hoofbeats, distant but clear, a rhythm too deliberate to be the storm's. Echo. Caleb stiffened, turning toward the cabin door. Evelyn's breath caught, her body rigid. He moved fast, sweeping hay across the stall with his arms, burying the chain, burying her. She gasped, clutching at his sleeve. "Don't!" His hand pressed over her lips, rough but steady. His eyes burned into hers, not cruel, but commanding. Silence. She trembled, but nodded. The hoofbeats grew louder, closing in. Caleb grabbed his revolver, sliding it into the back of his belt, then straightened, forcing calm into his shoulders. The door creaked open under a boot. 3 riders stood framed against the pale light, rifles slung, hats dripping rainwater. They smelled of wet leather and tobacco, the kind of men who carried death like another tool in their saddlebags. One spat a stream of brown onto the floorboards, eyes crawling over the cabin. "Thought this place was empty," he drawled. His voice was sharp, like a knife-testing bone. "Heard a drifter bought it off old man Greaves." Caleb leaned against the table, arms crossed loose, eyes cool. "That's me." Another rider stepped forward, taller, lean as a whip. His gaze swept the shadows, nostrils flaring like a hound's. "We're looking for something that belongs to us." Caleb arched a brow. "Can't say this shack holds much worth, unless you're after rotted beams and broken stalls." The tall one sneered. "We'll see." The third rider laughed low, mean. He was younger, eager. He tapped the barrel of his rifle against his palm. "Better hope the merchandise is still where we left it." Caleb's stomach coiled. He reached for the only weapon he had that wasn't iron. Calm. He pulled a bottle from the shelf, slapping dust from its neck. "Storm kept me up all night," he said, voice flat, steady. "Only company I had was this." He uncorked the whiskey, pouring into a chipped glass, the scent sharp as fire. He raised it to them. "You boys ride hard in weather like that?" The room tightened. Shadows from the riders stretched long across the cabin floor, creeping closer to the stall. Evelyn lay hidden beneath the hay, her breath shallow. "Each." "Second to blade's edge." The youngest rider smirked, licking spit from his teeth. "What you got under that hay, Drifter?" Caleb's jaw tightened. He set the glass down slow, hand brushing the butt of his revolver behind his back. The tall one stepped toward the stall. His boots left mud prints across the floor, each one pounding like a drum beat in Caleb's chest. Evelyn pressed her face deeper into the hay, chains muffled, but trembling. Caleb's heart hammered, sweat slipping down his temple. The rider stopped at the stall, eyes narrowing. He cocked his head, lips curling. "Check the stall," he muttered. The sound of a pistol being drawn split the silence, the click cold and final. The chapter ended there, suspended on the edge of violence, the air thick with whiskey fumes, mud, and fear. The hammer of the pistol clicked back, a sound sharp enough to cut through the storm's memory. Caleb's blood ran cold. Then steel exploded. He moved first, faster than thought, faster than fear. His revolver cleared leather and barked fire, the shot shattering the close air. The tall rider at the stall lurched back, chest blooming red. He staggered against the beam, knocking loose hay that rained down over Evelyn's shivering form. Chaos erupted. The youngest rider raised his rifle, but Caleb's second shot split the wood beside his head, showering splinters. The man cursed, ducking behind the table. Whiskey spilled across the floor, the smell sharp as a wound. Evelyn screamed. She clawed through the hay, trying to crawl free, the chain dragging, rattling, cutting grooves in the dirt. Her eyes were wide with terror, fixed on the door. The third rider burst outside, boots pounding mud. Caleb swung toward him, but the shot went wide, blowing a hole through the cabin wall. Light speared in with the smoke. Gunfire roared back. Bullets tore splinters from the frame, the cabin filling with the acrid choke of powder. Caleb ducked, low, teeth bared, lungs burning. The young one rushed him, rifle raised like a club. The stock crashed against Caleb's shoulder, spinning him hard against the wall. His revolver tumbled from his grip, skittering across the floor. Boots slipping in whiskey and blood, Caleb lunged, fists finding flesh. The two men grappled, snarling like beasts in a pit. The rider's knife flashed, grazing Caleb's ribs. Drawing hot blood, Caleb roared, head-butting him, the crack of bone echoing through the cabin. The man crumpled, hands clutching his ruined nose. Caleb found his revolver, snatched it up, and fired. The rider's body jerked once, then stilled, collapsing in a heap beside the table. Silence, broken only by Evelyn's sobs and the moan of wind through the shattered boards. Caleb's chest heaved like a spent stallion. His ears rang from the close thunder of shots, the smoke thick enough to choke. He wiped blood from his eyes, scanning. One man lay dead at the stall, the other sprawled lifeless on the dirt floor. But the third, he was gone. His hoofbeats echoed into the distance, carrying with them a promise of vengeance. Outside the yard was a churn of mud, rainwater, and blood. Caleb staggered into it, revolver raised, searching the horizon. Only the red dawn answered, burning, low against the plains. Behind him, a sound pulled him back, a rattle of chain, softer than breath. Evelyn. She crawled through the hay, ankle dragging the iron, foot slipping through blood. Her dress clung to her skin, soaked in dirt and fear. She reached for him with trembling fingers, voice breaking. "Stop!" Caleb's heart twisted. He holstered the gun with hands that shook. Then he dropped to his knees beside her. Her shackle was raw, the skin beneath torn open, blood seeping into the iron. He grabbed the hammer he'd left in the dirt. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of all that had just passed. The lives ended, the lives left behind. "Hold still," he rasped. She did, though her eyes shone wide and wet. He raised the hammer. The iron shrieked under. The blow, sparks biting his hands. Again, again. His muscles burned, arms screaming with each strike, but he didn't stop. The chain groaned, bent, split. With a final, furious swing, the clasp snapped. The sound rang through the yard, louder than thunder, sharper than any bullet. The shackle fell open. Evelyn's leg slipped free. She gasped, staring down at her ankle, flesh torn and bleeding, but no longer bound. Caleb dropped the hammer, chest heaving, sweat mixing with blood on his brow. He sat back, staring at her, the fragile shape of her frame, the way her shoulders rose and fell with ragged breaths. For the first time, he touched her, not as a savior, not as a stranger, but as a man. His hand brushed her cheek, rough thumb. Against dirt and tears, her eyes met his, wide with fear, but also something else, something nameless, raw. His voice cracked, low as confession. "You're free now." But freedom cuts deeper than iron. Evelyn's lip trembled. She didn't answer, only stared at him through the rising smoke, the world around them littered with death and silence. And for a long moment, the only sound was the drip of blood into the mud, and the faint cry of a hawk circling above. its shadow stretching long across the dying yard. The desert swallowed them whole. By midday, the cabin was nothing but smoke on the horizon, a dark smear against endless sky. Caleb rode with Evelyn behind him, her arms uncertain around his waist. The mare lathered with sweat as it carried them deeper into the barren stretch of red earth and stone. The plains gave way to hard desert, wind whipping dust into their faces, sun beating down until it felt like judgment itself. They did not speak much. Words hung heavy after blood. Yet every so often, Caleb would glance back, catching the pale set of her face, the stubborn line of her jaw. She did not weep. She did not beg. Shackles had scarred her ankle, but she walked beside him when the horse faltered, refusing his hand when he offered it. "Save your strength," he muttered. "I'm not broken," she answered, voice brittle, as dry reeds. At night, when the fire crackled low, her story unwound like thread. She was Evelyn of the Dawson farm, daughter to a family that had little but their pride. A wealthy ranch baron had made an offer: marriage, dowry, a promise of land. Her father had agreed, and men had come to hide her until the baron claimed his bride. Sold like cattle, traded like grain. Her voice did not tremble as she spoke, though Caleb felt rage burn his gut. He spat into the fire, jaw clenched, eyes hard. "He's no man, he's a vulture." She looked at him then, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. "And what are you? A savior? A killer?" He had no answer. The fire popped, sending sparks into the black. Later, as shadows stretched long, she reached for him. Her fingers brushed the scars that latticed his forearm, pale ribbons carved by knife and fire and war. She traced them slowly, reverently, as though reading a language he wished forgotten. Where did these come from? He swallowed, throat thick. Raids, battles, whiskey nights gone wrong. He paused, staring at the flames. But the worst, wound wasn't steel. "I walked away once. Left my wife and boy at the border. Thought I could buy them time if I drew the raiders off. I was wrong. By the time I came back," the words broke. He clenched his fists, knuckles whitening. His voice was a rasp when it came again. "I've carried that noose around my neck every day since." For a moment, silence lay heavy, broken only by the howl of wind over sand. Evelyn's hand lingered on his arm, then slipped down, fingers curling lightly around his wrist. "You can't undo the past," she whispered, her voice softer than the fire's hiss. "But you can stand for me now." He looked at her then, truly looked. Not as the girl chained in his stall, nor as the burden of his violence, but as a woman standing in the firelight, scarred, unbroken, daring to meet him with eyes full of defiance and something dangerously close to hope. Overhead, a hawk wheeled in the moonlight, its cry sharp as steel. In the sand beyond the fire's circle, a snake slithered silently, leaving a trail that glimmered under starlight. Predator and survivor, bound to the same harsh earth. Caleb's hand tightened over hers, a vow forming wordless in the space between heartbeats. But fate was not done with them. The night stretched deep, fire sinking low to embers. They dozed lightly, wrapped in blankets against the desert chill. Then, faint at first, but growing steady, the sound came. Hooves, slow, deliberate. The kind of rhythm that belonged not to a wild Mustang, but to men riding with purpose. Caleb's eyes snapped open. His hand went to the revolver at his side. Evelyn stirred, her breath catching. The sound of riders approached through the black, the earth trembling under the weight of what followed. The desert dawn bled red, the sky a wound stretching from horizon to horizon. Evelyn's breath misted in the chill air, her hair whipping wild around her face. She stood beside Caleb at the canyon's rim, the ground falling away into endless stone and shadow. The sound came first, distant thunder, growing louder, sharper. Hooves, many. The Baron's men driving hard, the earth trembled with their hunger. Caleb's revolver hung steady in his hand, though his chest rose and fell like a bellows. He spat once into the dust, voice low. stripped of everything but truth. This ends here. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the knife he had pressed into her palm. Her eyes were steady, though her ankle still bore the ghost of iron. "Then I stand with you." The riders came into view, dark shapes cutting through the rising light, rifles glinting, scarves whipping like banners of war. They circled wide, shouts echoing against canyon stone. A vulture wheeled overhead, waiting. The first shot cracked. Stone splintered near Caleb's boot. Then the world erupted. Gunfire hammering the canyon walls, smoke and dust choking the air. Caleb fired back, each shot measured, brutal. One man toppled from his saddle, blood staining the earth. Another's horse screamed, rearing before both, vanished over the canyon's lip. But they kept coming. Caleb staggered, a bullet tearing across his side. He gritted his teeth, firing again, dropping another rider with a shot clean through the chest. Evelyn's scream cut the chaos, but she didn't run. She pressed herself against his back, knife raised, her breath ragged but fierce. Together. They turned, covering angles, a storm of survival at the canyon's edge. Then silence. The last man fell, eyes wide, dust swallowing him whole. The gun smoke drifted away, leaving only the stink of blood, the moan of a dying horse, and the wild hammer of Evelyn's heartbeat. Caleb swayed, revolver slipping from his hand. She caught him as he fell, his head heavy against her chest, in the desert's shallow skin. No words marked the graves, only stones piled in silence. The land would take them back, as it always did. Weeks passed. The cabin stood no longer hollow, no longer haunted. Smoke curled from its chimney, soft against the evening sky. The stall held horses again, the fence mended by Caleb's scarred hands. Evelyn moved through the yard with quiet grace, skirts brushing dust, laughter rare but real, like water found after drought. On the doorframe, nailed deep into weathered wood, hung the iron shackle that had once bound her. Not as a chain, not as a curse, but as a marker. A memory. Caleb sat on the porch, pipe smoke curling, the desert stretching endless before him. Evelyn came to sit beside him, her hand slipping into his. No words were needed. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full, alive, a silence that carried promise. Overhead, a hawk wheeled against the dusk, wings wide, free. Evelyn leaned close, her voice soft as prayer, carrying into the twilight. We weren't bought. We were found. Caleb's eyes closed, the weight of years easing, the sound of her words stitching into him like a hymn. The desert breathed around them, eternal and vast, but for once it did not feel empty. It felt like home.